Today on CityCast Denver. Ever since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, people have been coming to Colorado from all over the country for reproductive health care. But Colorado hasn't always been a leader on abortion. One of our favorite regular guests, Justine Sandoval, has been an advocate for abortion access in Colorado for more than a decade. And she joins me to explain how we became a safe haven and what she's fighting for this year. Today is Wednesday, July 31st. I'm Bree Davies, and here's what Denver's talking about. Justine Sandoval, good morning.
Good morning.
So we're talking about abortion in Colorado, the history of how we got here, what's next. And I wonder, was Colorado always like this? Like, were we always this bastion for reproductive health?
I know that that's the sentiment nowadays because Colorado has done an amazing job of being a place where abortion is protected, but it has not always been that way. There were actually some early laws in Colorado that prohibited access to abortion. In 1891, the Colorado State General Assembly passed Senate bill that criminalized anyone who was helping to procure an abortion. So it was punishing someone who helped provide an abortion or give the abortion and not so much the patient. And then there was another law in 1909 that prohibited osteopaths. I think that's a word, but basically people who aren't medical doctors, but who are midwives or healers or things like that.
Which
in the
historically has been who provides and provides abortion and reproductive health.
And I would think that in
support.
1909 in Colorado, that's where most abortions were coming from.
Sure.
So there was a law that prohibited those types of people from performing abortions.
And so this is starting in the 1890s, not long after Colorado became a state. So this really is early on. We weren't this safe place.
So we began as not a haven for abortion access.
So 1800s and then to early 1900s. And then what comes next in this timeline?
So things actually take a big change in Colorado in 1967, where Colorado becomes the first state to decriminalize abortion in cases of rape, incest, or in which a pregnancy would lead to a permanent physical disability of the person. And this makes it the first state to actually do so pre-Roe.
Really?
Yes.
What was going on here?
So, it was a really interesting time. Actually, at that time in Colorado, the bill was created and sponsored by who was representative at the time, Dick Lamb, a Democrat who went on to be Colorado's governor. And his sponsor in the Senate was Senator John Birmingham, who was a Republican.
Really?
Yes. And they had passed this bill that was signed into law by a Republican governor, John Love, at the time. So this law not only legalized abortion in Colorado or decriminalized abortion in Colorado, but it overturned the previous restrictions that were in place from the 1800s and the early 1900s.
Do you know what Lamb's motivation was here, or?
A lot of it was access, and there was a time, I know that there still are today, there were pro-choice activists in the Capitol, and a lot of people actually for the first time coming into the Capitol to talk about these issues. I cannot remember the name of this woman, but there was a very active person in the Capitol at the time who was one of the first people to go in and talk about uteruses and talk about women's health to these representatives, and it kind of clicked for them. I think at the time, it was an issue. People were dying from accessing illegal abortions. And we were seeing that. So I think that was a lot of Dick Lamb's motivation at the time for passing this bill.
Of social change, too, in general. So this is one of those issues that has been evolving since then. Okay, so this is the 60s. This is the late 60s. What's next?
So after this law is passed in 1967, we immediately, within months, see the beginning of the anti-abortion movement here in Colorado. Colorado Right to Life was formed, I think, 4 months after the signing of the law. And they are still one of the oldest and most extreme anti-abortion groups in the country.
Really?
Yes. Colorado Right to Life actually is so extreme that they broke off with National Right to Life groups. And they had a really public split for the last anti-abortion ballot measure 115, where they are still very much in favor of of abortions being illegal in all cases, including rape, incest, life of the mother. And some of the more national groups have strayed away from that and think that there should be
Some
exceptions. But Colorado Right to Life still does not believe in those things. So they are still one of the most extreme and oldest in the country.
So in Colorado, just as much as we have these sort of codified protections of abortion, we still have groups that are on the extreme other end of it.
Absolutely.
That are just as active.
We created these laws to protect abortion rights, but in that also created some of the first anti-choice movement groups, which continued to create groups throughout the country. And it led to a lot of violence we saw within the abortion rights movement that continued on very heavy in the 80s and 90s with, bombings of clinics and murders of doctors in church.
Dr. Tiller.
Tiller. So it that sparked, starting in 1967, we didn't go straight to violence, but, those anti-choice groups led to the national anti-choice movement that we've seen throughout the last few decades.
Going back to just really quick to the Dick Lamb situation, you said that he partnered with a Republican and we were under a Republican governor. What is the role of the parties here in Colorado when it comes to abortion?
When it comes to parties, there is a clear divide between the Republican and the Democratic Party. In the Democratic platform supports access to abortion, right to abortion. The Republicans still very much are anti-abortion in their platform, and they lead a pro-life agenda. We don't like the word pro-life, but we'll use it for this example.
What would you say, coming from the reproductive justice world? What would you call them?
We say anti-abortion, anti-abortion groups, because the idea that they're pro-life and we're anti-life just doesn't make any sense to us.
Totally,
because we are not anti-life.
No, that's a helpful explanation.
Yeah, so it's anti-choice or anti-abortion is what we usually refer to those groups as. But so the Republican Party is still very much in that pro-life agenda. What we do see here in Colorado is that it goes beyond party lines for people. So while I think 1967 was the last time that this was a bipartisan issue.
Yeah, do we know why it was?
Well, I think it worked out then because Colorado's still this way to this day, very much about freedom and civil liberties. And a lot of Republicans in those days were very anti-government involvement, and seeing the government involved in any type of medical procedure to them was a violation of people's freedom. So they can get on board with this idea that I may not agree with abortion, but I really don't agree with taking away somebody's personal right.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this conversation I had with Don Coram, a Republican who has been very supportive of birth control programs. And also we talked about some LGBTQ issues, and he was like, it's not my business what happens in people's bedrooms, and the government shouldn't
be. Very OG Republican.
Yeah. But
Colorado Republican.
So that was maybe at that time, that's what the Republican Party was maybe looking more like, or at least was being represented as. But you're saying that this is not a partisan issue for voters.
No, not for voters. It's still an issue amongst parties, but when it comes to voters in Colorado especially, people will cross party lines and vote for abortion rights here in Colorado. And we've seen it over and over again. We've knocked down multiple anti-choice ballot measures that have come in throughout the years. We see people in different counties that might vote red still support abortion rights. So it has become an issue in this very libertarian-esque Colorado that it does not matter what your party affiliation is. It's still that personal liberty, that freedom.
Liberties, personal freedoms.
A funny example was after the presidential debate, the disastrous debate that recently happened, the NPR had people calling in to give their reactions, and a man called in from Colorado, and he was like, I forgot his name, from Colorado, and neither one of these presidential candidates represent me. I believe in a woman's right to choose and the Second Amendment. And I was like, that is so Colorado. This guy just called and summed it up.
So it's really, it's an issue that kind of functions like other issues here. It's about personal freedoms when we're talking about maybe like legalization of marijuana, I think would be a big one. The gun rights conversation, which definitely can vary across the state, but still can be about personal liberty and freedom. Abortion happens to fall under that for a lot of Colorado voters.
Yes.
This episode is brought to you by Fox Restaurant Concepts. Culinary Dropout at 9 & Co. serves classic meals done right. And with a spacious outdoor patio complete with fire pits and a gaming area, this spot is for anyone who enjoys killer food and delicious drinks in a beautiful space. Oh, and did I mention they have live music on the weekends too? Check out Culinary Dropout's happy hour Monday through Friday from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. and newly announced a special deal all Wednesdays and Thursdays called the Dropout Duo, which includes a charcuterie board and any 2 craft cocktails for only $30. Culinary Dropout opens weekdays at 11 a.m. and Saturdays and Sundays at 10 a.m. for weekend brunch. You can make reservations, inquire about private events and group dining, view the menu, and order online at culinarydropout.com. That's culinarydropout.com.
Hey, it's Paul Caroli, executive producer with CityCast Denver. And I know it's not always easy finding your way here in Denver. When I first moved here, I didn't understand what people were talking about when they said we needed the moisture so bad. It's a very dry climate. I understand that now. And that's why the mission of CityCast Denver speaks to me. We spend all day, every day, finding the most compelling stories, the most interesting people, and the best insider recommendations so you can make the most of this city and also make this city better. Members of CityCast Denver make that possible, and we couldn't keep doing this work without you. Become a member of CityCast Denver today at membership.citycast.fm and get exclusive perks like ad-free listening, event invites, and members-only updates. That's membership.citycast.fm. Thanks.
So beyond this move in the 60s, but then we continue to see pushback from these anti-choice groups. I can remember as far back as I can remember being old enough to vote, these issues being on our ballots, at least every couple of years, where it's something trying to chip away at the abortion access that we have, whether it's a personhood amendment or something around the ramifications of how an abortion clinic can or can't function. Why does that keep happening? And how did we go from there to still being this place that our governor is wholeheartedly 100%? Support.
So it's a long, complicated story, but
that's why you're
I'll give
here.
you the condensed version. So 1967 happens. Colorado is a leader in decriminalizing abortion here in the state. And then after that, Roe happens. And then instantly the chipping starts. So we see the Hyde Amendment, the National Hyde Amendment pop up, which bans public funding, paying for abortions. And then in 1984, Colorado voters passed Amendment 3, which was prohibiting state public funding for abortion as well. So that was interesting because we have people who are on board, but then we see Colorado voters pass a limitation.
Yeah.
And it kind of speaks to people's mindset that we can agree that people should have the right to abortion, but then we start putting our own moral layer on it where people are like,
who's paying for it?
Who's paying for it? Well, I'm not going to pay for it then. Or
I support it, but we shouldn't pay for it.
Exactly. The buts start coming up and it starts getting into the minds of people of well, shouldn't there be some limit? Shouldn't we not pay for it? And so these are the little things that start to happen that chip away at the right to access abortion, because the big thing is you can have the right to an abortion, but if you can't access it, then what good is that right? Then it's not a right. So this is one of the biggest things. And I believe Governor Lamb went on to say that these funding bans were probably one of the worst things to happen to abortion rights and access that going forward. And it really turned out to be one of the biggest barriers to people accessing abortion here in Colorado is being able to pay for it.
Because I think something we do know, whether abortion is legal or not, folks with the financial means will find a way.
Exactly.
So it's most impacting the most vulnerable people that don't have that access. And when you put something like a monetary barrier in there, not just you have to drive 100 miles, but the cost of it.
Oh, yeah.
That can really, I can see why that would be so harmful to the movement.
Exactly. And that was the warning from the 1980s when these bans went in effect, that this would cause these other effects to block abortion access. So that happens.
We're also thinking, this is also Reagan era. I'm just thinking about the rest of the country and
Well,
where we are.
I forget the name of the leader, but it was someone in the Reagan administration that was a big proponent of these Hyde amendments. So yes, Reagan era, another thing we can thank Reagan for.
I was going to say these were probably happening across, it's not just Colorado that's experiencing this
Yes,
stuff.
this was a national movement, and this was from the Reagan era too, and these right to life groups that got this big boost from that presidency. But abortion is still legal in Colorado because at the time the legislature is still trying to pass these anti-choice, anti-abortion laws. But because we have a Democratic governor with Dick Lamb and Roy Romer during that time, they had the veto power. So none of these things that ban abortion get through. But we make it to 1998 when another limitation pops up and it goes to the voters again.
This is the first time I'm voting, and as I'm 18 in this election, and I remember this.
You remember this
Yes.
one. 1998, voters approved another constitutional amendment that required parental notification for anyone under 18 seeking abortion care. And that's another one of those limitations, not taking away the right completely, but finding another way to chip away at it. A lot of people would say, oh, well, you should have to notify your parent if you're under 18. No.
I think not understanding the circumstances
Yes.
some folks are in when they're in this position, or, unfortunately, maybe they are pregnant as a result of something within their family. Like,
Yes.
you can see why this was such a crucial
And we
point.
constantly, I tell parents who still to this day, like, will be in favor of this. I'm like, you may be a great
Yeah.
parent who has wonderful communication with your child, and, you would feel betrayed in some way. But you probably aren't going to have that issue because you have a good relationship with your child. Yeah, like you mentioned, there are lots. Not every parent is a good parent, and not every child is from a loving environment, supportive home. And so for people's lives and safeties, they need to be able to access abortion without
It's
anybody
basic public
making
health,
the decision over their body as the pregnant person. So that's one of the reasons why we don't like parental notification. But that was enacted in 1998. And it's just kind of been a workaround that we've managed to get past, but it's still another barrier to access.
So it still exists?
It still exists.
Here in Colorado.
The funding ban is still on the books, as well as the parental notification here in Colorado.
That's helpful to know, because I think there's just this assumption that, like, we're just good to go safe all the way through.
No, that's one of the biggest
really an access
misconceptions.
issue. Okay.
Colorado has legal abortion. It has access to safe abortion, but it is still hard to get. There are very limited places where you can still get an abortion in Colorado.
I remember having to call several Planned Parenthoods when I was helping a friend because they were all booked up, or they just didn't have the staff for it. And again, since things like the fall of Roe, we're getting folks, which we always have gotten folks from other states, but it just like overwhelms this limited system we already have.
And that's been a big issue with a lot of our abortion rights groups who help bring or fund abortions and bring people to Colorado. Is Coloradans don't have access as well because of these funding bans, because of the limited locations where to access abortion. So it just makes it even more of a burden on the state for us to be able to provide what people need, because their states are, not helping. Since the Dobbs decision, majority of the people we've seen come into Colorado are from Texas, who are trying to access abortion care.
So stressful for them and us. But so this is the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
We see that past. It's still here today.
Still here. And then from that time, several ballot measures were brought forward to try to outright ban abortion or create limits, personhood amendments, life begins at conception type language. And none of them have passed through the voters, luckily. And then also because of some really great coalition groups that have worked together, they have stopped any of these types of anti-choice legislation passing through the state legislature. So that's been going on, and we're kind of holding steady there for a while and figuring out what we're going to do next. And then the big decision happened nationally to overturn Roe with the Dobbs decision. And it really motivated activists here to finally put an official, like, on the books protection. And in 2022, Colorado passed the Reproductive Health Equity Act, or RHEA. And that act declared that every individual has a fundamental right to refuse contraception or pregnancy and has a fundamental right to continue their pregnancy and give birth to or have an abortion. But basically, the Reproductive Health Equity Act guarantees that everyone has the right to choose what their reproductive outcome is, and that they can be protected here in Colorado.
So that was in 2022, and it was sort of like you said, a response to Roe. Like, we still have some issues, like you said, the age, the parental notifications issue, the fundings issue, but this was just a move to sort of reiterate this is something that Coloradans believe is important, also at the legislative level too, right?
Yes.
We're not just talking, this is not something that went to the voters. This was a legislative decision.
Yes. And so, this was to make that very clear where Colorado stands. And it's more important now than ever because we have a Supreme Court that is not friendly towards reproductive rights.
Right.
And any moment we can have a decision that impacts people across the nation. So Colorado wanted to create a safety net while there's an uncertainty at the court, that we are making sure that we establish this as a right here in Colorado.
Are we looking at anything coming up here soon? Our voters, our legislators, what are we looking at when it comes to abortion access issues?
I'm so glad you asked because we have an amazing opportunity in Colorado right now. There is a ballot measure that will be on this November ballot that will codify the right to abortion within the state constitution. And not only will it do that, it will also repeal the constitutional funding ban. So we will lift that Colorado State Hyde Amendment with this ballot measure. The funding ban thing is really important because I don't think people realize that the state ban impacts all of our state employees who have health insurance through their employer. Oh. There is no coverage for abortion and certain reproductive health care access on your employee private medical insurance. So that's our teachers. That's our first responders, all of our state employees that don't have that access here in Colorado.
To a basic medical procedure.
Yes, through their insurance. So this will change that and will also create that access piece that we said needs to be there if you have a right. So that is on the ballot. It needs to win by 55% because it's a constitutional amendment.
Because it's changing the Constitution.
It's changing the Constitution. It's overriding other things that are in there that have been blocks, like that Hyde Amendment. So that is going to be on the ballot in this election. And we're very excited about it here in Colorado because there'll be a chance to finally, once and for all, enshrine that right in the state constitution and make sure people can access it and really reflect the will of the voters in Colorado. Majority of Coloradans are pro-choice.
Yeah. So you're out in the field, though, every day. This is something that you're working on. Are you worried? Should Coloradans be worried that we're not going to get that 55%?
You know, I don't want to sound overly optimistic, but I have a lot of faith in Coloradans. And like I mentioned before on the show, that abortion rights overperform on candidates in elections. So in the last, few times we've had abortion on the ballot, people have really turned out. And we've increased our winning margin every time we've faced with one of these. So especially now with the climate we're in, I don't see this being something that we can't win. I think we really want to take it over the top, past 55%, to really solidify and show people that this is something that is a Colorado value.
For Coloradans.
Exactly. And if Colorado passes this, we'll be a beacon of light in a very uncertain country right now when it comes to reproductive rights. And Colorado will, set that tone for the rest of
for folks.
Exactly.
Or of other states where I think sometimes what helps to me is if you're in a state where this is just like a non-conversation, it can often energize folks even more who haven't been involved in a movement like this to say, okay, things are possible.
Yes,
change is possible.
Exactly. So we're very excited to have this on the ballot and to see what we can do in November.
Well, we'll be talking more about it in November because we are going to be going through that ballot with a fine-tooth comb. But Justine Sandoval, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed this show, why not take a minute to tell your favorite clinician at Planned Parenthood about us? Rate the show wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe to our morning newsletter and learn more about us at denver.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye-bye. That was great.
great. Ooh, I learned so much.
Like I could talk about abortion. I forget how much I know about it until I start
Until you
talking.
start.